In this video, I'm going to tell you why Paladins in the new One D&D playtest released by Wizards of the Coast is actually extremely overpowered and not nerfed like everybody thinks. I will show you this using a little bit of math, and we're going to break this up into three major sections, maybe four-ish major sections. First, we're going to talk about how early level Paladins are awesome now. Next, we're going to talk about the one thing everyone's really upset about, and the changes made to Divine Smite. We're going to talk about all the changes, both negative and positive, and why they don't really matter. In its own separate section, we're going to talk about why Divine Smite can't crit anymore. And we're also going to talk about why that doesn't matter. And then finally, we're going to talk about the one ability they gave Paladins in One D&D that completely wrecked the action economy of any monster ever published in a Wizards of the Coast book, and there's not a single thing any of them can do about it. So let's get started. Okay, so a lot of people are worried about the damage Paladins can output now. But if you really think about it, level 1 Paladins actually do significantly more damage in One D&D than they do their 5e counterparts, because those Paladins, one, have spell slots. They can spellcast at level 1, and they're all automatically given the Thunderous Smite spell. So level 1 Paladins can Thunderous Smite, where 5e Paladins cannot smite at all at level 1. And then level 2 through 4, they both have access to Divine Smite once a turn. Now level 5, that's when things get a little different, and they kind of took away the ability for Paladins to smite stack. Now what is smite stacking? Basically, the way the rules were worded in 5e said that you can Divine Smite by using a spell slot every time you attack, which kind of sidesteps the rule of you only being able to cast a spell once a turn that uses a spell slot, because the Divine Smites did not count as spells. So what Paladins would do at level 5 when they have 2 attacks, they would first use their bonus action to cast Thunderous Smite or something, which basically lets them hold concentration, and then once they hit with a melee attack, it would do damage and additional effect is like a secondary smite. But then on top of that, because Thunderous Smite was a spell and Divine Smite isn't, they were also able to pump another Divine Smite into that same attack. So literally Thunderous Smiting and Divine Smiting for the first attack, and then the second attack throwing another Divine Smite into it. Literally, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, being the only class that can burn 3 spell slots in a single turn, which obviously resulted into a lot of single target damage coming from Paladins, but also resulted in them running out of spell slots within the first 2 to 3 rounds of combat. I did the math, and if you smite this way every single turn, up until level like 12 or 13, you actually completely run out of spell slots in the first 3 rounds of combat. So what they've changed is the fact that 1, you can only Divine Smite once a turn in One D&D, and 2, you can't Divine Smite the same turn you've cast a spell. So whether you're using Thunderous Smite or any of the Smite spells, you cannot do those the same turn you do a Divine Smite. So really limiting you down to 1 smite a turn. That on paper sounds like a huge nerf. And if you compare, I actually took a level 1 Paladin for One D&D and a level 1 Paladin for 5e, and I leveled them up 1 through 20, and at each level tried to do the maximum damage in the first 3 rounds of combat, because the first 3 rounds of combat damage is actually how Wizards of the Coast determines creature CR ratings. So I did that, and from level 5 to around 14, 5e Paladins do significantly more damage in the first 3 rounds of combat, which you can all expect. But the thing is, they also completely run out of spell slots. And unless in your adventure that you're running your Paladin on, they're only doing 1 fight a day, well then over the adventuring day, they don't do more damage than the One D&D Paladin. The One D&D Paladin will have spell slots for the rest of the day and can actually smite once each turn for your whole adventuring day, because you're only allowed to do once a turn. Plus, the positive changes that they made to Smite are the fact, 1, we can use it with unarmed strikes and ranged attacks. So we can finally make like Holy Archer builds and like Iron Fist builds, which is really cool. And there's no more cap on it. In the original 5e Divine Smite, you could only have a max of 5d8 or 6d8 extra damage if the enemy was undead or a fiend. Now there is no cap, so if you multi-class with like a sorcerer or a bard, or the high level charisma based spellcasters, you could essentially pump a level 9 spell slot into a Divine Smite now. That's cool, even though you can only do it once a turn. So now when you think about it, it's not really about how many times a Paladin can smite a turn, but how many times a Paladin can smite between long rests. That's what actually determines the amount of damage a Paladin can pump out in a adventuring day. That's what really matters, unless you're only having one encounter a day. So if we focus on how many times a paladins can smite per day, then it becomes about how many spell slots you have access to. And both, if you take a level 20 paladin from 1D&D and 5e, they both have access to 15 total spell slots a day. So over the course of a day, if they use all of their spell slots, they actually do the same amount of damage, on average, of course. But let's take it a step farther and use the optional rule in Tasha's, which is Harness Divine Power, which lets you take one of your channel divinities and turn it into a spell slot. Well, Paladins in 5e only get one channel divinity per short or long rest. So once per short or long rest, you have an additional spell slot. You can short rest twice before you take a long rest. So that is 2 additional spell slots. So let's say 5e paladins have access to 17 spell slots. So they can smite 17 times a day. Now with 5e paladins, we're looking at level 20 paladins. They have 4 channel divinities instead of 1, and they also gain 1 per short or long rest. A 1D&D paladin can actually add up to 6 more. So essentially a 1D&D paladin will have 21 spell slots a day to use smites for if they so wish. So that's why the changes they've made to Divine Smite and the amount of times we can do it really doesn't matter if you consider your adventuring day. If you only care about the first 3 rounds of combat, then yes, 5e paladins are better, but after you burn literally all of your spell slots in those first 3 rounds of combat, you kind of just become a shitty fighter until your next long rest. Now, the next big cornerstone of Divine Smite that a lot of people are triggered about is that it might not be able to have crit damage apply. Now, the wording on this is a little weird and up for interpretation, and I think will need to be more clarified in future versions of this playtest module. But as of now, it's starting to look like if you take the new definitions of Divine Smite and the new definition of a critical hit from the playtest material, it kind of sounds like it can't smite. So if you compare the 2 Divine Smite descriptions, is the 5e states, starting at level 2, when you hit a creature with a melee weapon attack, you can expend 1 spell slot to deal radiant damage to the target, in addition to the weapon's damage. The extra damage is 2d8. So that alone says that the radiant damage is extra, therefore it is a part of the weapon's damage. If you look at the new description of Divine Smite, it says, when you strike a target, you can channel divine energy to smite it. Immediately after you hit a target with an attack roll using a weapon or unarmed strike, you can expend 1 spell slot to deal radiant damage to a target. That damage is 2d8 for a level 1 spell slot, plus 1d8 for each spell slot level higher than first. So that description does not state that it is extra damage, that is part of the weapon's damage. And now if we look at the new description for critical hits, in the playtest for 1D&D, it says, specifically, weapons and unarmed strikes have a special feature for player characters' critical hits. If a player rolls a 20 for an attack roll with a weapon or an unarmed strike, the attack is also a critical hit, which means it deals extra damage to the target. You roll the damage dice of the weapon or armed strike a second time and add the second roll as extra damage to the target. It specifically says your weapon damage gets doubled, not just the damage you do in that attack. Now, people are obviously very upset about that because rolling a critical hit, because paladins were the only people who could roll a critical hit and then decide to use a Divine Smite and have that damage be doubled. You would almost think it makes sense that you couldn't do that any longer. But you still can, you just can't do it with Divine Smite. See, I think a lot of people really looked at the Paladin section, but didn't look at the bottom of the playtest and look at the changes made to their Smite spells. Let's check those out now. Let's look at Thunderous Smite. A couple changes with this, which makes me think we can still crit with these Smite spells, just not Divine Smite. So, as you hit a target, your strike rings with thunder that is audible within 300 feet of you, and the target takes an extra 2d6 thunder damage. The word extra, I think, is super critical. The fact that it's extra damage on the weapon damage. And even if you look at the new way we cast it, so before it was a little more riskier to use these smite spells because you had to use a bonus action to cast a spell on yourself in which you held concentration for. And then the next time you hit with that attack, that extra damage would apply. If you missed that attack, you could still wait to do it on your next turn, but if you got hit and lost concentration, you would lose it. That's no longer the case. The way we can cast this now is the same way we can use Divine Smite. So it specifically says in the description under casting time, bonus action, comma, which you take immediately after hitting a target with a weapon or an unarmed strike. So, which means when you hit an enemy with a weapon attack, you can now choose to either just burn a spell slot and use Divine Smite, or cast a spell with your bonus action immediately and use one of these smite spells like Thundering Smite, Blinding Smite, whatever. So now this is essentially saying we can use our bonus action in this way reactively rather than preemptively. And because the damage type in each of these spells says extra, as in the damage is extra on top of our weapons damage, it leads me to believe that these smite spells can still do critical damage. Now, that's a lot of real, reading between the lines word lingo, but I think I'm right about this. Let me know in the description what you feel about. Can Divine Smite crit or not? Can these smite spells crit or not? Let me know how you feel about that, and let's figure it out as a community, so we can tell Wizards of the Coast exactly what to change the next iteration of this playtest. So the next thing I want to talk about are some of the changes they've made to the Oath of Devotion subclass. Now, it's the only subclass we have access to right now, but the changes are really huge. So first of all, at level 3, we get an ability called Free Casting. Now, what this does is let you cast one of the spells you get access to for taking this oath. So your oath spells, you can cast one of your oath spells completely for free once per long rest. Now, that's pretty huge because at level 9 and 13, we get access to Blinding Smite and Staggering Smite. So that's another smite we can do as a One D&D Paladin versus then a 5e Paladin. So that brings us up to 22 smites per day if we have that many turns. Second, at level 6, this one's really huge. We get something called Smite of Protection. So now every time we smite, which we can do every single turn pretty much, we get temporary hit points. Now, the temporary hit points might not sound like a lot. It's 1d8 plus the spell slot level you used for the Divine Smite. That comes to an average of maybe 6 temporary hit points per turn per time you Divine Smite. But if you think about a normal round of combat lasting 3 to 4 to 5 rounds, that's an average of 24 additional hit points enemies would have to burn through to actually down you. That's huge at level 6. And on top of that, if you don't need it, you can throw those temporary hit points on an ally within 30 feet, which I think really turns Paladins more into of a tank and brings them a little bit closer to where Barbarians are kind of the OP tank. Now, finally, the big thing that actually causes One D&D Paladins to do more damage than 5e Paladins, at least Oath of Devotion Paladins, is Holy Nimbus. Holy cow, the changes they make to this are awesome. So as a 5e Paladin, Holy Nimbus was kind of useless. No, you actually didn't get Holy Nimbus till level 20. So max level Paladin, you didn't get Holy Nimbus, and it's an action to cast it. Therefore, you would have to take a whole turn away of smiting twice as a 5e Paladin to cast this Holy Nimbus, which just does an extra 10 damage to enemies who start their turn in your aura. The changes they made to this in One D&D are awesome. First of all, you get it at level 14. 6 levels earlier. Before hitting max level, you have access to Holy Nimbus. Second, it is a bonus action, so you don't have to sacrifice action economy to boot this up. Third, you have more channel divinities as a One D&D Paladin. Especially at level 14, you already have 4 uses of it. So you can pretty much have Holy Nimbus up every single encounter you're in. And the damage is relatively the same. It's not just a flat 10, it scales with you with your proficiency bonus modifier plus your charisma modifier, which at level 14 should be anywhere from 8 to 10 additional damage. So that means Paladins can cast Holy Nimbus at level 14 and still do their normal attacks. So just adding this damage on, and that 10 extra damage to one or maybe multiple targets a turn really adds up over time. So the damage output from 14 to 20 between a 1D&D Paladin and a 5e Paladin are a lot closer together. If anything, 1D&D Paladin starts to pull ahead depending on how many turns you have between that adventuring day. Now, everything I've talked about so far are, in my opinion, gives and takes. We lost something, we gained something. We lost something, we gained something as Paladins, and I think are pretty balanced. But there's one ability they gave every Paladin, despite your subclass, that completely breaks the game, and that is Abjure Foes. This ability needs to be changed as soon as possible because it'll break every encounter you're in. Let me read you the description and then tell you why it is an absolutely core game breaker. As a magic action, which is this new thing they're trying to push, is calling magical abilities magic actions, you can expend one of your channel divinities, which you have 4 of at this point, to overwhelm foes with divine awe. As you present your holy symbol or weapon, you can target a number of creatures equal to your charisma modifier. Minimum of 1 creature that you can see within 60 feet of you. So at least like 3 to 5 creatures you can see within 60 feet of you. Each target must make a wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, the target is dazed and frightened conditions for 1 minute, or until they take any damage. So dazed is a new condition in 1D&D that they're trying to push, and it's similar to stun. It's like a lighter version of stun where it just really wrecks action economy. So if you're under the dazed condition, you can either move or take an action. You cannot do both, and you automatically lose your bonus action and reaction. And this is the kicker that makes this broken. On a successful save, so if someone beats your DC, the target has the dazed condition for 1 minute or it takes damage. So even if someone succeeds on their saving throw, they still take this condition. There is no other ability in the game that still affects a condition onto a creature when they succeed the saving throw. It's crazy to think how powerful this is. Now you might think like, oh, it only happens until they take damage. The thing is, if a paladin does this and affects it with daze, which they always will, because even if they succeed the saving throw, they'll be dazed. Every other player can hold their attack action until right before the paladin's next turn. So that means the creature will have its turn under the daze condition, and then they explode with damage because everyone held their action, and then the paladin can do this again. And there's nothing they can do to stop it. You know why? Because first of all, legendary resistances doesn't stop this. Legendary resistance just makes you automatically save a saving throw. This says if you save the saving throw, you still get afflicted with this condition. Second of all, dazed is a brand new condition, which means there isn't a single monster written in the Dungeon Master manual or any other Wizards of the Coast published book that has stat blocks in it who are immune to this condition because it's a new condition. So no creature is immune to it, and no creature can stop it with legendary resistances. So no matter what creature, whether it's a Tarrasque, a Lich, an Ancient Dragon, a Paladin can just raise their sword in the air at level 9 and completely wreck the action economy of it. This ability seriously needs to change, or they need to state like in the module that like monsters who are immune to stunned are also immune to dazed or something. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I've given you every reason of why I think the new Paladin is actually broken and not nerfed like most people think. And that's coming from someone like Paladin is my favorite class. Like I don't get to play a whole lot because I'm like forever dungeon master, but like whenever I do, I try to play a paladin because I like them. They're cool. All the other changes I really like. I think, you know, preventing players from smite stacking like is a good move. Maybe they did a little too much to smite. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments below, but let's at least change Abjure foes, because that's crazy. If you want to see my whole reaction to all of these subclasses, or I mean all of these class changes in the 1D&D playtests, let me know, because I'm probably going to do them anyways. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.